January 31st, 1990, Pushkin Square, Moscow. 38,000 people in line in one day, a world record. No restaurant in the chain had ever seen numbers like that. One burger cost 3 rubles and 75. For a regular Soviet worker that took more than half a day's work. For an American worker it took 20 minutes, and people still stood in line. Some stood for 8 hours in the cold, some travel hundreds of miles to get there. The question isn't what they ate, the question is what they were really buying. Getting McDonald's into the Soviet Union was not easy. It took 14 years. Not talks with some local officials, talk with the Politburo itself. But by January 1990 all of that was already over. What matters now isn't how they made the deal. What matters is what was going on inside people's head in that line. To understand that, let's do some math first. Not the price for one sandwich, the cost for a whole family. The average Soviet salary in 1990 was about 150 rubles a month. One Big Mac was about 2.5% of that. Once in a while, that's fine, a normal treat for one adult. Now take a family, mom, dad, 2 kids, Big Macs for the parents, cheeseburgers for the kids. That's already 11 rubles. No fries, no drinks, just the burgers for 4 people. 11 rubles, that's almost 2 days of one parent's pay for one lunch, one time. And here's the thing. Same 11 rubles could buy 5 kilo of meat at the market, or almost a month of lunches at the factory cafeteria, 50 kopecks a meal. Meat was cheaper just down the street. The cafeteria was 100 times cheaper. This isn't just math on paper. One Moscow family this year spent over 100 rubles in one day. On a cab ride and lunch, that's almost 2/3 of a month's pay just to go eat. So no, it wasn't really about food. Whatever hunger they were feeding, it was a different kind. Or to be honest, it wasn't hunger at all. If Moscow had tourist guidebook back in 1990, McDonald's would probably be listed first, ahead of Red Square, ahead of the museum, especially if you came in from out of town. And that's not an exaggeration. It was already happening. For 30 years Soviet people had a habit. If you can't find it at home, go to Moscow. It used to be sausage. People from small towns took the train with empty bags, came back with full ones. People called it a sausage run. Now there was a new destination. Not the grocery store, the golden arches on Pushkin Square. So why did people want this so badly? There is not just one reason. There is a few, and they piled on top of each other. First reason, people were curious. What was the West even like? For 40 years propaganda called it the enemy, but that Iron Curtain wasn't so iron after all. Western radio was jammed since 1948, and still about 25 million people tune it in every single day. Some families had a name for it, they just called it the Voices. Not enemy propaganda like the paper said, just voices. People listening at night, quiet, turning the dials through the static. By 1990, Soviet people already had some idea what was out there. McDonald's was the first chance to stop guessing and go to check for themselves. I felt like I was eating America itself. One of the customers says 30 years later. Turns out there is something even bigger than curiosity. By 1990, Soviet people had been living with shortages for years. Staying in line wasn't a one-time thing. It was just how life worked. Lines for meat, lines for shoes, lines for toilet paper, lines for anything. And you never knew if there'd be enough left once you reached the front. That wasn't a crisis, that was just normal life, year after year. But at McDonald's there was always enough food for everyone, every single time. For someone who spent years afraid of frying out, that didn't make sense. It was like someone had switched off the whole idea of shortage. Smiles and politeness, by the way, were not what people came for. And honestly, not what they even wanted. In Russian culture, smiling all the time isn't politeness. It means you actually like someone. A big white American smile can read as fake, not friendly. So good service wasn't the reason people showed up, it was a shock once they got inside on opening day. Later at home, at work, that's what people talking about. How they mopped the floor every 5 minutes. How every single register was open at once. They hired staff with no experience, on purpose, easier to teach them fresh than to break old habits. One of the first workers got asked in her interview, could she smile for 8 hours straight? And while we're here, let's clear up one myth. Some people still think this opening was a symbol of the Soviet collapse, like capitalism showed up and everything fell apart. That's not quite right. The fall of the Soviet Union has dozens of tangled up causes. Economic, political, ethnic. That's a whole different story, too big for here. McDonald's is just one visible piece of that puzzle, not the cause, not even the main symptom, just a moment that was easy to take a photo of. And the last reason, this one's not about wanting it, it's about rushing for it. People weren't afraid the Soviet Union would collapse. Nobody seriously believed that, not in 1990, even a year later in March 1991, the only nationwide vote in Soviet history was held. Get this, over 76% voted to keep the Union together. People didn't want a breakup, they feared change on that scale. What they feared was something else, that this one door would get slammed shut again. And that fear had a history. Back in 1979, this same company almost made a deal to open in Moscow. They agreed. Then, 17 days later, someone up top cancelled it. No explanation. The people standing in that 1990 line had lived through that. They knew something important. Soviet power could open a door, and Soviet power could slam it shut again. So the doubt wasn't just one person's worry, it was a shared feeling. A journalist at Izvestia wrote the same day that he wouldn't be shocked if in 6 months they had to airlift the Canadian managers off the roof by helicopter, like the Americans out of Saigon in '75. And plenty of people, once they got through that line, took home the paper cups, the plastic trays, not a souvenir, a trophy. Proof in case all of this disappeared again tomorrow. For someone from out of town, this mattered even more than for someone who already lived in Moscow. Same logic as the sausage on the train. You didn't bring home just a thing. You brought home proof. Proof you were there. Proof you touched something that wasn't back home and might never come back at all. So here the answer to the question from the start. In that line, nobody was really buying a burger. They were buying a chance to touch something that might never come back. And they were ready to pay for it. 2 days' wages, a night in the cold, a drive across half the country. Funny what happened next. The fear that stood in that line never came true. At least not then. Nobody shut McDonald's down. Nobody got airlifted off any roof, but the thing almost nobody believed in, the thing almost nobody wanted, the disappearance of a country that 3/4 of voters chose to save. Just 11 months later that happened. Anyway, in December 1991, the country that spent 14 years deciding whether to let in a burger, that country was gone. McDonald's on Pushkin Square stayed, so did the people inside it. They were just buying lunch now. That went on for more than 30 years. In spring 2022 it closed too. For good this time. The golden arches came down. In their place a new name. Вкусно и точка. Tasty and that's it. That's a different Russia. And a whole different story.